Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that Herman Melville wrote Moby-Dick with biblical names like Captain Ahab, Ishmael, Rachel, Jonah, and Lazarus woven into the story? And with the famous opening line of the novel being, "Call me Ishmael," learn how Melville spent years sailing the oceans and even worked aboard a real whaling ship before writing Moby-Dick. Discover that Melville sold fewer than 4,000 copies of Moby-Dick when it was first published, but today it is considered one of the greatest American novels ever written.
You know, usually when we think about a classic piece of American literature, we picture this very sanitized origin story.
Oh, yeah. Very pristine.
Right, like we imagine a writer sitting at a heavy mahogany desk, safely looking out a window at a manicured lawn, just, inventing characters out of thin air in a quiet, dusty study.
It's a very safe academic image of the creative process.
Yeah.
It feels orderly, controlled, like they're just sipping tea and writing.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of Herman Melville and his 135-chapter masterpiece, Moby-Dick, and that quiet study is just instantly shattered. I mean, the desk is smashed to pieces.
Nearly smacked.
We are looking at a literary landscape drenched in salt water, starvation, and the kind of sheer, brutal survival that completely defies any romanticized image of a 19th century author. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because you really cannot understand the mechanics of this novel without understanding the absolute chaos of Melville's youth. I mean, we're talking about a guy born in New York City in 1819,
Yeah.
one of 7 children.
Right, a big family.
And his childhood was just abruptly derailed. When he was only 12 years old, his father died suddenly, leaving the family with virtually zero financial safety net.
And that abrupt transition from a relatively stable middle-class existence to sudden poverty, it forces a child to view the world through a radically different lens.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, he isn't just dropping out of school. He's being thrust headfirst into the brutal machinery of 19th century labor.
But, how does a 12-year-old even find a foothold in that era? The innocence is just stripped away overnight. It's basically a modern survival adventure show, but real life.
Totally.
By the time he turns 20 in 1839, he's surviving as a cabin boy on a merchant ship crossing the Atlantic. And then just 2 years later, in 1841, he joins the crew of a whaling ship, the Acushnet.
Sailing right into the South Pacific with the U.S. Navy.
Right. And he's sailing into these vast, unpredictable waters.
He is throwing himself into the absolute extremes of human experience. He isn't reading about the world. He is colliding with it.
Yeah.
The physical labor of a whaling ship was relentless. It was dangerous and just incredibly isolating.
Which makes the wildest detail of his time in the South Pacific even more striking. Because while traversing the Marquesas Islands, Melville and a crewmate actually jumped ship.
They just deserted.
And in doing so, Melville was actually captured by the Typee cannibals.
Which is just wild to think about.
I mean, he was held captive for 3 entire weeks before he was finally rescued. 3 weeks.
What's fascinating here is how that specific trauma, being entirely removed from Western civilization and thrust into a society with entirely different moral and survival frameworks, how that intersects with the foundation his family did manage to give him before the bottom fell out.
Oh, like his early childhood.
Exactly. Before his father's death, Melville's mother, Elizabeth Shaw Melville, heavily exposed him to biblical stories.
Right.
She read them to him constantly. And despite his lack of formal schooling later on, he developed this obsessive fascination with the poetic style of Shakespeare.
Okay, so you have a mind steeped in the high drama of King Lear in the Old Testament, but physically he is swabbing decks, hunting massive ocean predators, and literally living as a captive among cannibals.
Right, it creates this unique cognitive dissonance. He doesn't see high culture and primal survival as separate spheres.
Yeah, they're mashed together.
Exactly. He realizes that the grand existential themes of Shakespeare and the Bible aren't just theoretical concepts meant for the mahogany desk.
Yeah.
They are actively playing out in the blood, the violence, and the grease of a whaling ship.
Which leads directly to the raw materials he synthesized for Moby-Dick. Because Melville didn't just rely on his own 3 weeks with cannibals or his time on the Acushnet. He combined his lived experience with terrifying historical facts.
He really did.
But wait, so Moby-Dick isn't entirely fiction. How much of this actually happened?
A surprising amount of the foundational horror is real. The Acushnet is just part of it. Melville pulled from heavily researched historical events that were literally terrifying the 19th century public.
Like what?
Specifically, the catastrophic sinking of the Essex in 1820.
The Essex.
Yeah. The Essex is the grounding reality of Melville's novel. This was an 87-foot whaling ship from Nantucket that was out in the remote Pacific. And out of nowhere, it was rammed not once, but twice by an 85-foot sperm whale.
Wait, rammed by the whale on purpose?
Yes. The sheer physics of that encounter, I mean, we're talking thousands of tons of force. It completely shattered the ship's hull. The crew had no choice but to abandon the vessel in 3 small, incredibly fragile whaleboats.
And they were thousands of miles from the nearest coast.
Thousands of miles. The aftermath is what makes this historical event so harrowing. The survivors drifted for nearly 8 months.
8 months on little rowboats.
Essentially, yes. They were navigating a barren stretch of the ocean with virtually no provisions.
That is horrifying.
The psychological toll of watching your crewmates slowly succumb to dehydration and starvation, eventually having to make the horrific decision to resort to cannibalism just to survive another day, it deeply, deeply haunted the maritime community.
I mean, for Melville, the Essex wasn't just a scary ghost story told below deck.
No, not at all.
It was proof that human industry and our supposed dominance over nature were incredibly fragile illusions.
And he actually read the first-hand account by Owen Chase, the first mate of the Essex, while he was out at sea himself.
Wow. Just imagine reading a detailed, non-fiction account of a whale actively destroying a ship and the crew slowly starving while you are sleeping on a whaling ship in the exact same ocean.
It's terrifying.
No.
It fundamentally altered how Melville viewed the sea. It was no longer just an economic workplace. You know, it was an indifferent graveyard.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because he takes the absolute despair of the Essex tragedy and he combines it with another historical phenomenon, a real famous whale named Moby-Dick.
Yes, Moby-Dick.
Right. And you look at this, it's like the true crime inspiration for a Hollywood blockbuster.
It really is. Moby-Dick was a massive male sperm whale famously spotted near Mocha Island off the coast of Chile.
And he was aggressive, right?
Extremely. For decades, he survived violent encounters with whalers, accumulating dozens of harpoons in his back. He was known for preemptively attacking ships, swimming underneath them and just smashing them into splinters.
He was a legend among whalers.
An absolute legend. He was an anomaly in a heavily industrialized trade.
But in reality, unlike the fictional Moby-Dick, the machinery of the whaling industry eventually won out. The real Moby-Dick was ultimately killed and harvested for blubber and oil.
And that is where Melville's genius as an architect of fiction comes into play. He takes the documented behavior of Moby-Dick and the catastrophic outcome of the Essex, but he deliberately changes the ending.
He elevates it.
Right. In the real world, the animal, no matter how formidable, is eventually processed into a commodity. By making his fictional Moby-Dick invincible, Melville transforms the whale from a biological creature into an untouchable metaphysical force.
He takes these bloody, true stories of survival at sea and maps them onto the most profound template he knew, the Bible stories from his childhood.
Exactly.
Moby-Dick is fundamentally a spiritual wilderness story. What I find brilliant is how he shifts the geography. Like, when you look at the Bible, the most common setting for testing one's faith for profound isolation is the desert.
40 days in the wilderness.
Yes. But Melville takes that entire concept, and instead, his narrator searches for insight and meaning at sea.
Because the desert and the ocean share a crucial characteristic: total indifference to human life. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Melville recognized that the 19th century whaling ship was a microcosm of society.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
You have people from all over the world trapped together in a wooden enclosure, surrounded by a terrifying void. By assigning explicitly Old Testament names to his characters, he signals to you, the reader, that this voyage isn't just about harvesting oil.
It's way deeper than that.
It is an attempt to hunt down God, or perhaps the devil in that void.
Let's look at the mechanics of those names, actually, because the most famous opening line in literature, "Call me Ishmael," what is the specific function of making him the narrator?
Well, in the book of Genesis, Ishmael is the illegitimate son of Abraham.
Right, the one who was sent away.
Exactly. Cast out into the desert wilderness to make way for the favored son, Isaac. He is the ultimate exile. Melville's Ishmael goes to sea because he feels profoundly alienated from society.
He says he has a damp, drizzly November in his soul.
Yes. By choosing the ultimate biblical outcast as our lens, Melville ensures we view the entire story from the perspective of a marginalized observer. Ishmael has no inherent loyalty to the systems of power that govern the ship.
And as a sole survivor, when the wrecked ship is ultimately destroyed, he literally quotes the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 15, "And I only am escaped alone to tell thee."
Which is the exact message brought to Job after all his wealth and children are wiped out by a punishing universe.
It's so heavy, and he also compares his misery to Lazarus, right?
He does. Job is the central biblical text dealing with the problem of unmerited suffering. Why do catastrophic things happen to innocent people?
Right.
Melville weaves that theological inquiry throughout Ishmael's narration. Ishmael compares his own misery to Lazarus, the man Jesus raised from the dead, and he asks this deeply philosophical question. He asks if Lazarus wouldn't rather be in Sumatra than here.
Basically saying, wasn't he better off dead?
Exactly. He is evoking the imagery of a man pulled back from the peace of death, questioning the comfort of just being alive in a cold universe that allows tragedies like the Essex to occur.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the ship that eventually picks Ishmael up from that cold universe, the Rachel, because she is named after the mother of Jacob's son, Joseph.
Yes. And the biblical Rachel is famously known in the book of Jeremiah for weeping for her lost children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more.
Oh, wow.
The ship Rachel in the novel is out on the water frantically searching for a whaleboat carrying the captain's own young son who has been lost at sea.
So when they stumble across Ishmael drifting on a coffin instead, the maternal grief of the ship's namesake is actualized.
Precisely. It pulls in an orphan, but not the child she was desperately looking for. It reinforces the reality that the ocean doesn't care about human lineage.
Man. Then there is Jonah. Because, I mean, you really cannot write about a spiritual crisis and a giant whale without addressing Jonah.
It's practically mandatory. Melville dedicates an entire early chapter to a sermon about Jonah, delivered by a character named Father Mapple.
Jonah is the one who defied God, got swallowed by the whale, lived in its belly for 3 days, and then was delivered to Nineveh, right?
That's the one. The mechanism Melville uses here is brilliant. Jonah tried to flee from God's command by getting on a ship, and God sent a storm and a whale to swallow him and force his compliance.
Right, the traditional lesson.
Father Mapple's sermon establishes the traditional 19th century theological view God is supreme, and human defiance is inevitably punished.
But Captain Ahab operates as the exact opposite of that lesson.
Completely the opposite.
He is named after King Ahab, one of the most evil kings of Israel, who worshipped idols and led the Israelites completely astray.
The historical King Ahab led an entire nation into the worship of the false god Baal. Captain Ahab leads his entire crew into idolatry too, but the idol isn't a golden statue. It's his own vengeance.
That is so dark.
He projects all his rage, all his questions about the cruelty of the universe onto this one specific white whale. He elevates a biological animal into a demonic deity.
And according to the historical and literary coding Melville embedded in the text, the whale itself represents atheism, or like the terrifying concept of an entirely indifferent, godless universe.
The whiteness of the whale is the key mechanism here. Melville dedicates a whole chapter to the color white. Usually white represents purity or divinity.
Sure, angels, light, all that.
Right. But Melville argues it also represents the terrifying void, the blankness of an empty sky, the silence of a snowstorm.
Oh, that gives me chills.
If the whale represents a godless, meaningless universe, then Ahab is a man trying to violently punch a hole in that void. He demands that the universe have a meaning, even if it's a malicious one.
Ahab would rather believe the whale is actively evil than accept that the whale simply does not care about him.
Exactly.
That explains the climax perfectly. When the harpoon finally strikes Moby-Dick, the rope flies out with incredible speed, right? It wraps around Ahab, and it pulls him under the water to his doom.
He isn't eaten by the beast. He is strangled by his own instrument of vengeance.
His obsession becomes his literal executioner.
It's a devastating critique of what happens when human beings refuse to accept their limitations. Ahab uses the industrial machinery of a whaling ship, a symbol of 19th century American capitalism and dominance, to wage a personal, spiritual war.
And the natural world simply entangles him, pulls him under, and swims away unharmed.
Well, unbothered.
We are talking about a story that layers the economic reality of the American whaling industry over the darkest existential questions of the Old Testament, using the mechanical terror of a true maritime disaster.
It's brilliant.
It's dense, it's violent, it's deeply philosophical. So what does this all mean for a reader in 1851? You would think a 135-chapter masterpiece, blending true adventure, cannibal rescues, and deep philosophical meaning would be an instant hit.
You would think so, but it absolutely was not.
It altered the landscape by completely alienating its audience, didn't it?
Utterly. The reading public of 1851 wanted a straightforward maritime adventure story. They wanted the kind of book Melville had written earlier in his career, which were romanticized, accessible accounts of his travels.
Not a thesis on the universe.
Right. They did not want a 135-chapter labyrinth that interrupted the plot to explain the anatomical structure of a whale's head or to debate the nature of the human soul.
The publication stats are just grim. I mean, it was published in London by Richard Bentley on October 18th, 1851 as The Whale.
Yep.
And then by Harper and Brothers in the U.S. on November 14th, 1851. And over his lifetime, the book sold fewer than 4,000 copies in the U.S. and U.K. combined.
Fewer than 4,000. It effectively destroyed his career as a popular novelist.
Why did it flop so hard? Were audiences and critics just completely unprepared for his complex writing style?
Yes. Critics called it frantic, badly constructed, and virtually unreadable. They heavily criticized him for his complex style. They completely missed that the mixture of styles was the entire point.
Wow.
Melville was trying to invent a new form of modern literature that refused to separate the matter-of-fact brutality of physical labor from the high romance of philosophy.
I want to bring up his response to this failure because it highlights Melville's incredible, stubborn genius. When critics and friends pushed him to write something more commercial, his response was uncompromising.
Oh, I love this quote.
He said, and I'm reading his exact response here, "Well, I might write a more satisfactory book if I did this, that, or the other, as you suggest. I dare say you're perfectly right, but this is how I like it, and this is how I'm going to do it, and if other people don't like it, I can't help it, and what's more, I don't care."
And what's more, I don't care. The psychological fortitude required to say that is staggering.
I mean, he's watching his reputation tank in real time.
He has a family to support. And his response is to double down on his artistic integrity, which really makes you think about how we create today. In what ways could your own life experiences, adventures, and foundational knowledge help you stubbornly create your own story or pursue your own vision?
Even if people criticize it.
Exactly. Even if everyone tells you it's unreadable. He understood the scale of what he had achieved, even if his contemporaries didn't.
Because it took nearly 100 years, right, well into the mid-20th century, for society to finally look at the darkness in Moby-Dick and recognize it as the pillar of American literature it is today.
He never lived to see it embraced. It took generations for the cultural climate to shift enough to appreciate a narrative built on such profound existential doubt.
It completely recontextualizes the incredible journey of Herman Melville. I mean, from a 12-year-old dropout surviving the devastating loss of his father, to a captive of cannibals, to a man who fused the horrifying sinking of the Essex with the Book of Job.
It's an unbelievable trajectory.
He created a 135-chapter masterpiece that he fiercely refused to compromise on. And it wasn't until the mid-20th century that the book was finally recognized as an American classic.
It really leaves you with a final thought to mull over, building on all the source material. Because Herman Melville poured his entire life's trauma, his time with cannibals, and his deepest spiritual beliefs into Moby-Dick, only to watch it sell fewer than 4,000 copies in his lifetime.
Yeah.
It raises a profound question about the nature of true genius. Are you willing to dedicate yourself completely to a vision that is so complex and true to your own voice, knowing it might only be fully understood and appreciated by generations that haven't even been born yet?
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.